Now let's turn our focus to Afghanistan, where the Taliban look like they're actually up to something good. Last year, they banned the cultivation of poppy. That's the crop used to make the drug heroin. It was a major source of income for Afghan farmers, also a major source of funding for the Taliban. But they banned it. Now, on the face of it, the move seems like a rare positive by the Taliban, but the West is not happy with it. They're now raising an alarm over the shortage of the drug. Not making this up. Some in the West do not want this poppy ban to continue because this could lead to problems on Western shores. Our next report explains.
The Taliban are in the middle of a war. Not the usual kind though. It's their version of a war on drugs. You see, Afghanistan is the world's heroin basket. For years it has produced over 80% of the world's heroin. But last year, the Taliban put a ban on poppy cultivation. Poppy is the crop that is eventually turned into opium and then heroin. It was grown throughout Afghanistan, especially in the west and southwest. Nowadays, you see headlines about the Taliban burning down fields of the crop. Now you'd think this was a good thing. The women-hating tribal warlords finally doing something good for a change. But it seems that the West isn't too happy about this move. Take a look at these headlines. The first article talks about how the Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world. Yes, really. It's by the United States Institute of Peace. The organization is an independent institute founded by the US Congress, and it warns about the dangers of less opium in the world. Let's first look at some of the points raised. It says that poppy farming has helped Afghan farmers survive the chaos the country regularly goes through, that forcing them to move to other crops would bring more hardship to the small-scale farmers. It would also widen existing inequalities. Rich farmers could hoard opium harvests and sell the crop at a higher rate when supplies dry up. The poor farmers will be at risk. They could resort to selling assets like livestock to make ends meet, leading to ruin in the long run. This sounds like a humane argument. It considers the plight of poor Afghan farmers. But let's look at the other side. Almost 3.5 million Afghans are addicted to opium in some form or the other. That's about 10% of the population. The drug is wrecking lives, more so since the Taliban took over in 2021. After all, a lot of people turned to drug abuse to cope with the horror of the Taliban's return. So while the plight of the farmers is important, opium may not be the best way to support their welfare. The other arguments raised against an opium ban in the USIP article and others don't really focus on Afghans. They're about what will happen to the West. An opium and heroin ban will reduce the supply of the drugs in Europe because most of Afghanistan's heroin makes its way to Europe via Iran, Turkey, and then the Balkans. The relative ease of heroin access actually shields Europe from worse narcotics. From synthetic opioids like fentanyl. That's a drug leaving a trail of bodies in the US. It's reportedly 50 times stronger than natural heroin. Europe has managed to stay relatively fentanyl-free for now. The end of Afghan opium could change that, bring about a worse drug crisis in Europe. Now you can still justify this fear. While not brave or ideal, countries are of course allowed to prioritize the lives of their citizens over foreigners. But the other reasons given are less about life and more about comfort, the fear of immigrants. Once again, Europe wants to keep refugees away. Afghan refugees this time. The articles against the opium ban warn of a new exodus from Afghanistan, of farmers who lose their livelihoods coming to seek asylum in Europe. And for that, the solution seems to be letting them continue farming poppy. It's ridiculous. How can the West be so xenophobic that they would prefer more drug production in the world over accepting refugees? How can they advocate just letting Afghans make more heroin instead of making room for refugees looking for a better life? The ending of Afghan opium should be celebrated. Any short-term difficulties the people face should be addressed through aid. For once, the Taliban seem to be on the right track. This should be encouraged. Because look at the alternative. The Taliban have historically depended on heroin for funding. And if they cannot feed the Afghan people, if they face too much public anger, they might just restart poppy cultivation. Then xenophobic Westerners may sign relief, but Afghans and the rest of the world will continue to suffer from a drug crisis.